Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gloria, former head of strategy at Cree, one of Europe's leading health tech companies, and I'll be the moderator in this digital health panel. A lot of experts say that the COVID pandemic has worked as a magnifying glass for the most pressing issues our society is facing today. This has been more apparent than healthcare, where digitalization has historically been very slow. All our guests today realized this a while ago and set out to change it. Please meet Sophie, CEO and co-founder of Quonmedical, and a medical doctor herself. Quonmedical is a digital health platform that leverages technology and data to connect patients and doctors around the world in a mission to create a healthcare system that is more open and equal. Next, we have Bettina, CEO and co-founder of Juli, an app helping patients with complex chronic physical and mental health conditions. Bettina, Juli is Bettina's third software company, and she's also a shark on the Swiss TV version of Shark Tank. And finally, we have Hansi, one of the most well-known super angels in Europe, with more than 40 portfolio companies, including the likes of Rentastic, My Sugar, and Spock. In his previous life, he was also an executive at a multinational pharma company. So in order to start this panel, I think we can't really avoid the question of the pandemic or bring the elephant in the room. I would love to ask all of you, how has the COVID really changed your business or investment strategy? So what has really made you think about, okay, I have to change something here? Maybe Bettina,
Sure.
If you want to start.
Well, Juli was founded right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we've only been around for a year, and we met once as the founder team, actually 3 of the 4 of us before the lockdown, and essentially born during the pandemic. But it has been, well, for me as a serial entrepreneur, it's been really interesting to see that remote first works. I was not a believer, absolutely not. I used to be sort of the classical school Oracle one building company, and have just been convinced over these last years, but specifically in this year, that it does work. And most people at Juli have never met in person physically, but we have a great bonding within our team. So that's one thing. And in health tech, it's been a step change for remote solutions, for telehealth solutions. And that's been great because physicians who are typically slow to adapt to new technologies, and I can say this with confidence because my father and my uncle and my aunt are all physicians, usually takes a while for them to get things into clinical practice. And that has just accelerated so much during the pandemic. It was just thrilling to see how quickly these solutions were adopted.
Sophie, how has it changed your business? You've been in it for a while.
Yeah, indeed. And so Quonmedical is built based on the principles of freedom of choice for any doctor, freedom of travel to go see a doctor anywhere, and all of that. And of course, when the pandemic hit, and we were kind of cut down in those dimensions of freedom. At the beginning, we also were quite insecure of what was going to happen, and we really thought that for the next foreseeable few months, we wouldn't have patients booked through Quonmedical, and we might have to think of other things to introduce to our business. But really looking back on the past 12 months, what it has shown was that people keep looking for doctors, and people keep looking for the right doctor. And healthcare is something that, something you don't postpone. You postpone going to the restaurant, you postpone going to the hairdresser, you postpone going on holidays. But if you need medical treatment, that is not something you postpone. And that is something that, is one of my key learnings going through the pandemic and having built a business that was highly dependent on personal freedoms, high degrees of personal freedom, still we see patients every single day getting in touch with us, using our product and saying, I want my treatment now. I want to see my doctor now and not in 6 months from now. And that is something that, you know, I think was clear before, but became even clearer having lived through the pandemic and now hopefully being on the way out of it.
And Hansi, has it changed the sectors that you're investing in? Have you rethought your investment strategy?
Well, talking about investment strategy, I still have a quite big portfolio of more than 30 active companies. And as you can imagine, in this portfolio, there's everything. The good thing is no company has died in that year. But I stopped doing early stage investment in 2017, which means that my portfolio is quite mature. So what does it mean? There are 3 or 4 companies that are struggling a lot, mainly companies which have to do with event business, as it is logical. But the other 3 or 4 companies that are really benefiting from the crisis, everything which has to do with EdTech, for example. I'm invested, for example, in Buzu, the language learning company, Mimo, programming learning company. These companies really got a big boost. The major change for me was, to be honest, my personal life has changed because I'm sitting on the board of 24 companies. That means I have between 80 and 95 board meetings a year, and I was traveling the whole year around the world, well, around Europe mainly. So that immediately stopped because I do all my board meetings via video call. And that in general, for me, is an increase in quality of life. So in fact, I cannot complain. I'm not worrying about myself and my portfolio.
And Bettina, you mentioned that Juli is your 3rd software company. Why did you decide to really do something as complex as starting a digital health business, which I think is one of the hardest ones to build? And how do you think it's different from, for example, a digital advertising software business that you created before?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'm a glutton for punishment, honestly. I like the challenge. I really like solving hard problems. And yes, you know, my first company was a text-to-speech software company where we raised $8 million and we sold it for $125 million. My second was a video advertising optimization company. We raised $28 million in VC investment plus another 15 in debt. So, you know, I also sit on a lot of boards and do that kind of work. And I have my TV show where I play an investor on TV. I am actually one. But what I found over the last 2 years where I actually did that mostly after I moved back from Boston to Switzerland was that I really don't like being once removed from the action. I like to get my hands dirty. I like to be in the midst of things. And I really like being part of a team of really mission-driven people that are passionate. And what better field to found that in than in health? Because so many people are passionate about improving other people's lives. That it's sort of a no-brainer if you want to recruit passionate people that you can do that in health. From the technical side, all of my startups have had an AI component to it. My first one, founded in 2001, was really one of the early companies that employed neural networks to calculate prosody of speech output, of text to speech. At Pixability, we used our AI machine learning to improve the placements of video ads contextually mostly, but also optimize auctions. So that was really great and wonderful to do that. And I thought that I could put the learnings to work with something that was personally meaningful for me, because when I had my first child 10 years ago, I suffered from extreme insomnia. And nobody helped me. I went to my PCP several times and he said, "You're breastfeeding, I can't give you anything, you're just stressed." And I started trying to hack myself, wearing a wearable sleep monitor, all these kinds of things, and finally succeeded in curing myself. But it turns out later that I probably had an atypical postpartum depression. And, I realized how powerful it is when you can put data together, but I didn't find anything on the market that could help me do that. So that's why I'm trying to use sort of my powers of tech to bring new things to the healthcare market.
That's awesome. And Hansi, while you're doing all your business angel investments, etc., you also decided to kind of initiate or co-found Calm Storm Ventures, which is an early stage venture capital fund based in Vienna, really focused on digital health and well-being. What attracted you to this space and not any of the other sectors that you previously invested in? Why did you think that it was so important to start a fund in that space?
Well, let's try to summarize that in a few words. First of all, I'm not a co-founder of Calmstorm. I had a good friend, an advisor, and investor in Calmstorm, and helped them, the two co-founders, to build up the fund. As you mentioned in my introduction, I was working for the pharmaceutical industry many years ago, 35 years ago or so. And via management round, I bought a manufacturing plant in Spain 25 years ago and started to build up my own pharmaceutical plant and then pharmaceutical group, which several years later I sold successfully back to the multinational industry. But that was a moment at the beginning of, I think it was 2003, 2004, when I decided for me, and I will not go into details why, I do not want to make more business with drugs. I have seen too much. I don't like drugs. And then I remember, by the way, I think it's 3 or 4 years ago, when I was reading an interesting study, which said United States only is spending $3 trillion a year for healthcare. $3 trillion. I mean, that's really a huge amount. The biggest market you can imagine. And 75% is spent for therapy, and only 25% of that is spent for diagnosis and for prevention. And the study concluded very clearly that in the next 8 to 10 years, this will turn around. Instead of 80-20, it will be 20-80, but on a much lower basis, because as we know, diagnosis and prevention is much cheaper than therapy. And the study also came to the conclusion, this is going to be the first $1 trillion market we ever have seen in the world. So, I mean, we have to be very clear that the healthcare market, not only that healthcare is the most important thing we have to care about. I mean, it's our health. There's nothing more important than that. But it's also the most interesting, the most attractive, and the biggest market. And it's here for us. And why it's for us? Because that therapy and that diagnosis is mainly dependent on tech companies, on software. So this, and since we have the smartphone, this is where practically all these digital health companies have a huge playground. And then I said, okay, I don't want to have to do anything with drugs, but yes, I want to be in that market. That's the reason why in my portfolio, I always had kind of 20-25% of my whole portfolio at least was in healthcare. And I also had very interesting and important successes with exits with my healthcare companies. So that's the main reason. And why a fund now? That's very easy. As I said before, 3 years ago, I stopped investing in early stage companies because it's just too much, you know. I mean, I can only manage a number of companies, and believe me, still more than 30 is too many companies. But I liked what I was doing. I like to invest there. But the only way of doing that is that you invest via a fund, but not via a big fund, via a fund where you know the people investing, where you can advise them, where you can help them, where they know you and can call me and ask me and maybe bring to a meeting or sit or as a board advisor or whatever. That's the main reason why I'm so close to that new fund.
And Sophie, maybe over to you. I've read that you recently partnered up with Bergman Clinic, really like an old school chain of clinics out of the Netherlands, to buy Medical One, a platform for plastic and cosmetic treatments with, I think, 12 treatment centers across Germany. This is definitely a trend I think we've seen across healthcare, where kind of digi-physical is coming together, because you kind of need to manage the care pathways. Typically, they are not only physical or only digital. In your opinion, what are the success factors of managing this kind of digi-physical experience well? And what are the mistakes you've also made in the past? Because I mean, also before, you've always been a digi-physical business. You have physical components to your business. So what are the mistakes you've probably made in the past?
Yeah, I think the deal that you just mentioned is a really good example of that. So before we came into this deal, it was Medical One and Medidate in one thing, and they kind of tried to have the whole vertical integration under one roof. And in theory, I think that sounds really good. But you know, me as having been a doctor myself, having worked in a hospital, running a hospital or running a doctor's practice is a completely different animal to running a digital company. So you have to put a lot of effort and have a lot of diverse expertise to make this work under one roof. I'm not saying it was a bad idea, but I am just saying it's really, really tough to do that. So what we are doing now is we are almost reverse engineering this now. And what Quonmedical did, my company, was taking over the digital part of the business again. That includes online marketing, that includes all, you know, automated workflow optimization, personalization, but on a, you know, using technology and data, pre-qualification, aftercare, all these things that you can do with a great Bergman Clinic. I'm not sure if they would agree to the word old school, but I like how you used it. But kind of a very traditional clinic chain, very large in the Netherlands, on their verge of expanding within whole Europe. They are taking over the whole clinical operations. And with that, we work very closely together. We are managing the digital part of the business, and they are managing kind of the clinical operational part of the business. So what are we doing here? We are focusing on what we are really good at. We are really good at everything that's digital. We are not good at running a clinic and running an operating theater. Bergman Clinic is really good at that. They're really good at building clinics. They're really good at hiring doctors. They're really good at, you know, maintaining operational excellence. And I think this is something, when you think about the healthcare system in general, it's not about taking over other people's jobs. It's about focusing on what you're really good at. And the people who are really good at data, they should be focusing on, you know, leveraging what they have. And people who are really good at one-on-one with patients, and those are usually the doctors, they should be focusing on what they're really good at and not trying to, you know, do what they're not supposed to do. And I think that's kind of the important part to understand when we talk about technology in healthcare, is it's not, so technology should not replace the human factor. I think technology should enable the human factor by taking out the inefficiencies, by, you know, using data to allow us to be more precise and faster and more productive and more efficient in what we're doing, so that we can, you know, focus on what is also important. I think I'm a big believer that healthcare will always require a human factor. In the end, we are emotional human beings. Maybe in 300 years from now, you will have robots who would replace doctors, or maybe I'm just biased because I'm a doctor myself, but I think, you know, we as human beings, we will still at one point require the interaction with the doctor. I'm not saying that, you know, to the extent that we see today. I think that there's a lot where we can use technology to replace that. But in the end, my vision for a healthcare system is to allow doctors to be doctors, to empower patients to be great patients, and use technology as much as we can to enable a healthcare system that works for everyone in there.
Yeah. And Bettina, I mean, Sophie has talked a lot about data. And I guess building an app for patients, for chronic patients, it's all about data. And you're collecting, I don't know how many, but million probably of data points a day about patients, both from sensors in your devices, but also from self-reported data. What do you think how do you think an effective data strategy looks like in a digital healthcare company? And what are probably the infrastructure that is still missing, operability that's still missing in the system? What would you wish that?
Well, I think the very first thing that's important is privacy and trust, because your health is the most personal thing to you. And I think that that Europe is particularly good at emphasizing that. Juli is active in the US market, so we're headquartered in Boston. And we, even though I'm physically right now in Switzerland, the reason that we chose to be in the US market is not because they're so great with privacy, but because they are so good at electronic health records. And that has to do with market consolidation, with EHR solutions that are rolled out in most health systems. And so we saw a way too big challenge in Europe to integrate electronic health records on a country by country basis. That just overwhelmed what we could do as a startup. And so that's why we are sort of taking European thinking around privacy, European data standards, GDPR, and all of the compliance that's involved around that to the United States, so that users will trust what we're doing. And we also, are working mostly on the Apple platform, where Apple has recommitted itself to higher standards of privacy. I do know what I'm talking about because I was in advertising, and as everybody knows, all the data that is collected in advertising, similar to Hansi, I was really appalled at a lot of the things going on in that industry and decided not to continue. My company, Pixability, never did that. We were all about contextual targeting. That's why the company today is doing so well, because we're not focused on taking in third-party data and cookies and all of that. But I just found it egregious how much data was captured by Google and Facebook and the like. And so I sort of, with my next company, I'm stepping up to the plate with a privacy first thesis, where patients can decide which data they want to look at themselves, which ones we can see, which ones they volunteer for research. And that's very core to what we do.
Maybe an open question to the whole panel. And I agree with Bettina, the kind of medical health records are really missing in Europe. Like, what needs to change, and where does the change need to come from? Who do you knock on, on whose doors do you need to knock so that this really changes? And is there a possibility that this will change in the next 5 or 10 years? I think it's probably relevant for a lot of digital health startups out there that are listening in.
I think there's a possibility, because finally the change always comes from the market. So there's a lot of pressure from one side, that for example, a lot of pressure from the US, and they are succeeding with things we do not have in Europe. I can imagine that peu à peu, very slowly, there will be some changes. I mean, we have that issue, for example, in Austria, we have the e-card, and the e-card in theory should have all medical data, which for me personally, I would say this is really great. You go to the doctor, you give him your e-card, and the doctor knows everything, what's happened to me. I mean, there's nothing better than that. But voluntarily, you can opt out of that in Austria because there was no way that all the people would accept it. You cannot imagine how many people opted out. So finally, it doesn't make any sense. You know, I mean, some people have it, others don't have it. It's not only the authorities. It's people are used to that kind of privacy, and my medical data and my health is my thing. I can understand it to a certain extent, but in the moment, whether I'm really aware of the fact that if I give away this data, the quality of my life is going better because they have better treatments for me, they have better things for me, I would be open for that. So I think coming back to your question, the only way of changing that is pressure from outside, pressure from other markets.
Cool. Maybe as a final question before we end at the end of the panel, and maybe it's really well connected here. What do you think are kind of the health trends of the next 5 or 10 years? So if you would start a company today, if you would invest in an early company, what would you start in? Where do you think the trends are going? Where Quo Vadis, where's Europe going in particular?
You mean within healthcare or in general?
Within healthcare.
Okay, so first, because if it's not within healthcare, I would say first of all healthcare. Well, secondly, within healthcare, everything which needs a lot of data and everything which needs a lot of software and everything which needs is kind of interesting, and you can imagine that there is a big market because partly you still do not know the market, and then, and that's for me extremely important, whether the founder team is a really cool founder team, whether I like them and whether I think they have the energy and the power to go through what they have to go for the next years, because this is at least as important as any idea they have, because it's always about execution, not only about the idea. That was a very general answer, I know, but I mean, I can't do it different.
Yeah. And Sophie, what underlying trend is kind of going to shape Quonmedical the most?
I think next to what Hansi has said, there will be a redefinition of the typical patient experience. I think we all are patients, we all are consumers in the healthcare market, and we're not going to put up with the shitty experience that we might face anymore. Like we see, you know, I think we're going to follow what other industries have shown us in terms of service levels, in terms of technology, in terms of tools, in terms of transparency, in terms of accessibility, in terms of choice, all these things that are not a given in healthcare. I think those will be the things which we will see in the next few years, and the companies who will crack that will be the most successful ones. Because we are at the interface to the market every day, and patients are just fed up with this lowliness and the intransparency and the way they're being treated, and I think that's going to be a big trend as well.
Do you think there will be a US healthcare companies and European healthcare companies, given how different the markets are, or do you think they will converge over time? Today it's kind of two different ecosystems, right? Ultimately,
so it's hard to predict the future, of course, but I think also in healthcare there is still room for some sort of winner takes it all, although the healthcare system is also very fragmented. So I can also imagine a future where you have a few big players who work together.
Short interruption, my take on that, there will be US and there will be European big companies, maybe European unicorns, but most likely these European unicorns will be funded by US VCs.
Is that good? That's interesting. And like Bettina, like what's your take on that? I mean, you said very explicitly we will focus on US for healthcare data, etc. What do you think needs to change in Europe and the European digital health tech or healthcare ecosystem for you to come back to Europe other than digital health records? Where are you see as digital health in Europe actually?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're great digital health startups in Europe, and they will be taking their technology to the US. But what I think it needs in Europe is something akin to Obamacare, which the specific implementation was billions and billions of dollars that went in to subsidize the creation of the implementation of electronic health records. And I think it needs an EU-wide program to really synchronize data so that there is a true free market of data for healthcare data in Europe, and that not one provider can hold you hostage. You can take your data. There's the FHIR standard, which I think is really great and shows the future there. So that's definitely a big thing. And if you ask me about some healthcare trends, I think we will see in the next decade a lot more use out of longitudinal data, so time series data that has thus been really neglected in finding patterns in healthcare, finding populations. And I think that the computing power is finally in healthcare finally being applied in that direction.
Awesome. So thanks for all of you for joining this panel, and I hope all of the listeners enjoyed the insights.